Joining me now, MSNBC military analyst and Medal of Honor recipient Colonel Jack Jacobs, former Florida U.S. Attorney and MSNBC legal analyst Kendall Coffey, and from our NBC station in Dallas, investigative reporter Scott Friedman. Scott, I'll start off with you because you've covered this story so extensively, and I think your reports certainly should be seen by as many people as possible. You spoke with you spoke with the father of one of the shooting victims, Howard Berry, whose son was Staff Sergeant Josh Berry. I want to play a little bit of what he said regarding just his son's pain and what his son is going through with this trial. Let's play it.
He was tormented. He was, yeah, that's a good word. He was very tormented. He was just tortured, and no matter where he went, he couldn't find a safe place because the Army was a safe place. He felt that there were considerations being given the shooter that weren't being given the victims, and he couldn't understand. He said, you know, when a soldier gets injured on a battlefield, you take care of him, and he just felt like it just wasn't the case.
So, Josh, a lot of these victims feel that they've been abandoned. They have a litany, if you will, of complaints, valid complaints, from Purple Hearts to the fact that this is still considered a workplace issue of violence and not a terrorist attack. What else are they saying to you? Scott, I'm sorry.
Well, they're frustrated, Tamron, with the entire process. They first of all feel like this has just taken entirely too long to bring the case to trial. They feel like there have been too many accommodations made, too many delays allowed in the case. There was, of course, a delay that was well reported where Hassan was allowed to grow a beard in violation of military rules. There was debate over that took additional time. And many of them, as you just heard Howard Berry say, the father of one of the victims, they feel like the shooter has been given more accommodations and considerations than the victims have in some cases. They point to the fact, as you mentioned, that the victims have been denied Purple Heart medals and combat-related pay, things that were awarded to other soldiers wounded in attacks overseas. They were awarded to victims of the 9/11 attack on the Pentagon. They've been denied to these victims because the Pentagon does not consider this to have been an act of terrorism, something the victims strongly dispute. Meanwhile, they've watched as they see him, as you mentioned, being transported on a daily basis to and from the jail to a special facility where he can prepare his trial defense. There's expense involved in that. It's costing local taxpayers money, according to the local sheriff there, as they've continued to try to secure those transports.
And Colonel, you heard Scott say the hardship that a lot of these people are experiencing and their families. What is your feeling here? We know that a number of colonels will oversee this case. The panel will consist of 9 colonels, 3 lieutenant colonels, 1 major. Hassan cannot plead guilty. This is a part of the Unified Code. Military justice does not allow for it. So this is all procedural, but it doesn't go down well when you hear him in his opening statements admit to the crime.
No, but it is procedural, and they have to go through it. It's in the Uniform Code of Military Justice. I remember when I was a lieutenant, I was a trial counsel of all things and a defense counsel, which they don't do anymore for special courts. And I sat on panels too. You have to go through the procedure because otherwise you are going to have the ability to challenge any result, and we don't want that to happen. I think the thing that should concern people the most about this is the fact that the incident happened in the first place. Don't forget that Major Hassan was identified by his supervisor as being a risk, and yet they continued to let him carry on and then shipped him to Fort Hood with this happen. That's what we should be most concerned about.
But we're not hearing a lot of that conversation, even over the 4 years that it's taken to get to this point in the series of reports from Scott that we've even played here on our show.
I think the people who supervised Major Hassan before he got to Fort Hood, who knew that he had a problem, who identified him as somebody they wouldn't even send patients to, they have a lot to answer for.
Let me bring in Kendall Coffey. Kendall, another part of the outrage is that Major Hassan, which is his right to represent himself here, but I want to play with one of the shooting victims, Alonzo Lunsford, said regarding being questioned possibly by Hassan. Let's play it.
I will not show fear in the face of the enemy, because the man that shot me, Major Hassan, is going to be the man that's going to be cross-examining me. That's a huge challenge.
It's a huge challenge, but talk to me, Kendall, about this component. We've seen this, obviously, in civilian trials as well.
Yes, we know that there's a constitutional right to defend yourself. It's very troubling at times for the courts and certainly for victims. How distressing must it be that this man, that they believe, rightfully we all think, to be a killer, is going to be on this stage, able to play the role of the lawyer, even question them. But it's a part of our system that is inevitable. The one thing they want to make sure with this trial is that there's no constitutional violations, no legal mistakes. And I think these victims are going to be ready for this guy.
A lot has been said about Major Hassan's mental state. You heard Colonel Jack bring this up as well. How does that factor into his representation, even though you have this right, certainly, and this hearing is under the guidelines of the military, as pointed out as well by the colonel, but this man's mental capacity, his state of mind certainly comes into question, and what he is capable of doing or saying while cross-examining people who are also suffering from traumatic stress after this and many other things we may never know mentally after that horrifying incident that played out on Fort Hood.
Well, the court needs to, as I'm sure it has, determine the competency of him to go forward as his own lawyer. Because certainly if he were mentally impaired to the point where he couldn't do it, that would obviously create significant due process issues. And there are going to be some testy, painful, and very angry moments. But I think the court is ready for it, and I think the victims will be able to deal with it.
Scott, I want to play another one of the victims who spoke with you, and he says that he's upset about the fact, or at least again, this issue of not being treated fairly in his mind, or treated even better than Major Hassan, the man accused of this crime. Let me play what he said.
The day that came out was the day the government looked at every single one of the victims of the Fort Hood shooting and spit in our faces.
And this man said he's not even able to make ends meet. There are days where he and his wife don't have food on the table because he's not bringing in a check there.
Right, that's Logan Burnett, who was shot 3 times during the attack. What he was talking about there was, again, the government's decision to not label this as an act of terrorism, and that has resulted in the victims being denied Purple Heart medals, combat-related pay, benefits that they feel their families deserve given what they've been through. And his frustration also comes from the fact that Hassan remains on the government payroll today. We obtained records from the Army for the first time showing that he's been paid nearly $300,000 since his arrest. The Army does not have any provision right now under current rules to take pay away from a soldier who's been accused of a serious crime, even though they can suspend the pay. The Pentagon can suspend the pay of a Defense Department employee, a civilian employee who's been accused of the same crime. There are 3 congressmen now, since our reporting, who've taken up that issue. They've introduced a bill that would strip Hassan of his pay, and it would prevent future soldiers accused of similar acts from remaining on the taxpayer-funded payroll.
Colonel, your reaction to that?
Well, the current rules don't provide for a suspension of pay until after a conviction, and a decision will have to be made whether to apply something like this across the board. The answer will be no. It's going to have to be a special bill, because otherwise you would have circumstances in which soldiers who are, even for minor infractions, will have to forfeit their pay before it's adjudged that they have to forfeit their pay. I think the Army can get a great deal of the money back in any case. After he's convicted, they will fine him and get the majority of it.
But the fact that this is still considered workplace violence, despite statements from Hassan himself.
Well, the government has decided to do that, I believe, so it doesn't confuse the issue, and then the government then be required to remove him from the military system, send him down to Guantanamo or some other place. One of the reasons they're doing this is to keep this within the jurisdiction of the United States Army, so that the United States Army, has total control over the process. Labeling it as terrorism, for example, might extract Hassan from the Army system, and that would make it probably much more difficult to convict him.
Colonel, thank you so much. Scott, thank you for your reporting on this, and Kendall Coffey, thank you for joining us as well.